2, 3, 4,000 years from now, probably the climate will be again fine, and the same with pollution and so on. But if we lose the animals, the elephants, the rhinos, and so on, life, unless there is a nuclear holocaust, will continue on Earth. But the animals that we're losing and the plants we're losing now will never exist. Same like the trilobites or the dinosaurs that became extinct in the past, because of a mass extinction similar to what's happening now, they will never exist again.
Hi guys, I don't believe it. I am back after a 1-year absence. It is great to be back on my own channel here at Collapse Chronicles. This is Sam Mitchell at Collapse Chronicles, and it is a hot, sticky day here in the collapse of global industrial civilization up here in Ithaca, New York. But today I have the great pleasure of finally, after 2 years, bringing on this gentleman, Dr. Gerardo Ceballos. We're going to go down to Mexico and bring this man on. Come on and just say hello briefly, Gerardo, and just say hola, and then we will get going.
Hi, hola. How are you guys?
There you go. Okay, just making sure everything sounds. We're doing a quick sound check. So, guys, you might remember just this past week I read part of a paper that Gerardo wrote with Paul Ehrlich last year. In 2017 is when he wrote this paper that got a lot of attention, and we're going to be talking a lot about that. Speaking of Paul Ehrlich, I just want to tell this story. When I interviewed Paul Ehrlich, was my very, very first interview ever on this channel 3 years ago. And at the end of that interview, I asked Paul Ehrlich, I said, Paul, if you were looking for people to interview, to tell us about the state of this planet in the 21st century, who would be on your list? The number one name he came up with was Gerardo Ceballos, that if you need to know what is going on in the dire straits of this planet. So for those of you not aware of who Gerardo Ceballos is, he is a biologist, ecologist, and conservationist based in Mexico. He was born in 1958. He is 1 year younger than me. He received his PhD, surely in biology, from the University of Arizona in 1989. And since 1990, he has been a professor of biology. I think this means the National University of Mexico. Ceballos' research areas include the ecology of populations and communities, macroecology and biogeography, ecology and conservation of endangered species, the design and conservation of nature reserves, and environmental impact assessments and ecological planning. So we could talk all day with this fellow, but probably what unfortunately Gerardo is best known for, he is the man who we're going to credit with coming up with the greatest two-word definition of the 21st century, in my opinion, and that is biological annihilation. In 2017, Gerardo, along with Paul Ehrlich and Rodolfo Dirza, wrote this infamous study, I guess you would call it, titled with the name Biological Annihilation via the ongoing sixth mass extinction signaled by vertebrate population losses and declines. That's a big mouthful, but we're going to ask Gerardo to speak in plain English mixed with a little Spanish. And let's start out with some definitions, Gerardo. Biological annihilation. What is it, and how did you come up with that term?
Well, thank you very much for having me here in your great show. Well, in 2015, we wrote a book called The Annihilation of Nature, because basically, when we start to study conservation and the state of the planet in the 1990s, species becoming extinct and habitats becoming disappearing were kind of selected. I mean, larger animals were more prone to extinction than the smaller animals, and species with small geographic ranges were more prone to extinction than species with larger ranges. Carnivores more prone to extinction than herbivores, and so on. So it was kind of selective. Extinction was selective. I mean, not all the animals, not all the plants were kind of the same sensitivity to extinction, to the impacts of human activities. So at that time, you could say that the larger animals are more prone to extinction and so on. But as the passes time, and as we start to look at in the early 21st century, we start to look out with our studies and studies from many other groups and institutions and people that selectively all kind of animals, all kind of species start to become prone to extinction. So in 2015, we have a study that analyzed basically what's happening with a species becoming extinct. And at that time, we were fortunate to be able to compare the current species extinction rates to the extinction rates in the last 3-5 million years. And we find out that the species that has become extinct in the last 100 years will have taken 10,000 or more years to become extinct on the normal times. So at that time, we were able to establish that we have entered the sixth mass extinction. And but then we also look at the data, and we were perplexed that we put too much attention on a species extinction, and that the species extinction is the end result of losing populations. And we could be in a hypothetical situation where no species extinction happened, and we lost all the population but one of all the species, and we'll be in tremendous ecological problems. For instance, let's think that if jaguars disappear from Mexico, it doesn't matter that there are jaguars in Brazil, because the role that the jaguars play in Mexico are gone. Or if the forest, the temperate forest, they say the oak forests are gone from the US, it doesn't really matter that there are oak forests in Mexico or Europe, because the role that oak forests play in the US is gone. And this is the first part. We start to think, well, this is really bad. We're losing too many species too fast. But then when we look at this 2017 study at the populations, we were really surprised to see how many species were having a population declines. And to do our study, just to give you an idea of the magnitude of the study, we look at the data of more than 33,000 species of vertebrates, mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians. What was the population trend? And more than around 32% of all the animals that we look at were losing populations. So, and these were common species, very common species, rare species, very rare species, abundant, non-abundant species, big, small, with large geographic range, small geographic range, temperate, distributed, tropical distributed. So it means that basically our activities has erased any signature of a specific traits, ecological traits, that will make a species more prone to extinction, and we erase that, and our activities were basically impacting everything. All kind of species were becoming extinct, and this is when we came out with this term, biological annihilation, because basically what we are doing in nature is eradicating of kind of plants and animals, with the dire consequences that this has for us, for humans, on the one hand, but also that this impact that this has on the history of the evolution of life on Earth.
Yeah, so this ties in. There's two things that come to mind when you're talking about this, where we hear all of the time about, I guess they attribute this to the World Wildlife Federation, talking about how I think they're up to 68%, not of the number of total species, but just literally the number of individual fellow Earthlings we share this planet with. At 68% of them have been obliterated off the face of this planet, and since when, like 1970. And then you also hear that humans and their livestock now account for 97% of the biological mass on the animal mass on this planet. Am I on the right track? Is that what you're referring to?
That's exactly right. I mean, because when we published our paper, I mean, there were other studies like the World Wildlife Fund that you mentioned. It's called the Living Planet Index that has shown that around 70% of all individuals, animals, of the vertebrates have disappeared since 1970. In other words, like 70 individuals, if you have 100 elephants, 70 elephants are gone. If you have 100 bears and so on. Yeah. So this is one fact. And the other fact is, as you say, right now, what our domestic animals, I mean, our poultry and cattle takes up with us around 96-97% of all the biomass of the planet, and then only 3 or 4% is being composed by all the wild vertebrates. We're talking about around 40,000 species. So this means that we're taking the space and the energy that all these animals require to survive. So it's not surprising that what we call the biological annihilation is related to the way we have accaparated, we have really take up all the space and all the energy for everything else. So if you look at this, basically what we're saying is that we are destroying basically all wild plants and animals at a rate that it is an annihilation. Basically, in the last, the World Wildlife Fund studies in 1970, but really the big scale destruction is in the last 2-3 decades. And every year that pass, the things are accelerating. We published this paper in 2020 that shows that since 2015 only, 2020, the the rate of species extinctions has greatly accelerated. And this means that our activities are not only already caused a massive demise of the species, the wild species on the planet, but this is accelerating. And let's remember something. Let's remember something that is incredibly important. We know only about 2% of the animals, plants, and fungi that lives on the planet. Only 2% has been described. The rest, 98% of all the wild plants, wild animals, and wild fungi are still undescribed scientifically. So every time we destroy a forest in Brazil, in Mexico, in Southeast Asia, we are wiping out many hundreds of thousands of species that we don't even know. That's the scale of the problem.
Yeah, you closed out that that long study, the final depressing sentence of that whole depressing study. This was written, you wrote this in 4 years ago. You wrote, all signs point to ever more powerful assaults on biodiversity in the next 2 decades, painting a dismal picture for the future of life, including human life. That was in the last 4 years, we have had Donald Trump come and go. We have had, of course, our buddy down there in Brazil, Jair, I call him Bozo Nero, is my...
Brazil, we have Trump, we have the Mexican president, who doesn't who doesn't rely on science to take decisions, and who believe that all the environmental movement, it is fixed, it is being created to diminish the importance of improving the economy of the world. Something completely nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the situation in Brazil, I mean, right here on the mainstream media today, that deforestation in May in the Brazilian Amazon is probably broken new records.
Yeah.
Every sign, I mean, 4 years ago, you were saying all signs point to ever more powerful assaults. We hear that the UN, the biodiversity goals, the ISHI, or however you pronounce that word, every one of them failed. Every last one of them, the goals between 2010 and 2020, a complete zero. I mean, how do you just take yourself out of being a scientist for now? How do you deal with this, brother? I mean, without just being completely, just curling up in a fetal position.
Well, it is incredibly difficult. On the one side, emotionally, it's incredibly difficult because, as we said, I mean, we say that in 2017, but also we have a paper in 2002, and we have another paper in 1997 showing these trends. And so in terms of what we are saying, one of my colleagues told me a few weeks ago, please don't make more prophecies because they are happening, And 4 years ago, we didn't have Bolsonaro, we didn't have the fires in Australia, we didn't have the fires in Alaska, in Siberia, we haven't the massive losses of pieces of ice in the Antarctica, and we didn't have so many other species becoming extinct or getting close to the brink of extinction. One very important thing that we mentioned briefly in our 2017 paper and other papers before that is that by allowing this destruction of the species of the wild plants and animals, we're eroding the capabilities of Earth to have, on the one hand, a human life in particular, and then life in general. Because we scientists call these environmental services all the benefits that we get for free from the function of nature. And the function of nature depends on the wild plants and animals. Carl Sagan say that there are more celestial bodies, planets and galaxies and so on in the universe than signs of grains on all the beaches of Earth. Just imagine. And in this immensity, there is only life as far as we know on Earth. And this is because of the way that wild plants and animals work. So environmental services are, for instance, the proper combination of the atmosphere of our planet to have life, the quality and quantity of drinking water for us and for all animals and plants, the conversion of the energy of the sun into energy that can be used by all organisms. The pollination, 70% of the crops that we use are pollinated by wild animals, bees, butterflies, bats, birds, and so on. So we're destroying that. Every time we lose a population, every time we lose a species, we are eroding that capability of Earth. So when we published the paper in 2017, we didn't have COVID, but we mentioned that one of the really important things that we get from nature is the protections against new diseases. So unfortunately, what we have predict, we and many other scientists have predict that a pandemic could happen because of the way we are destroying natural habitat like the Amazon forest or the Congo forest or the forest in Southeast Asia, or the way we treat animals, the illegal trade. Just in China, every year, 100 million animals, big animals, I mean mammals, birds, reptiles, are traded most of them from the illegal market, are traded for being used as food or as a medicine, a traditional medicine. 100 million animals. This is what we know. And this is only China. And then if you have Mexico, Brazil, the US, and the rest of the world, we're talking about probably billions of animals being taken out from the wild every year. And this has caused the perfect conditions for having a pandemic like COVID. In the last 4 decades, we have had around 50 episodes of new diseases like HIV, Ebola, Lassa fever, Marburg virus, hantavirus, Lyme disease, and so on, that can become epidemic, and in this particular case, pandemic. So when we say that we're eroding the conditions of Earth to maintain life, we're referring to things like these, like the COVID pandemic, on the one hand, or also like losing the capability of pollinating our crops or climate change. So just to give you an idea, since we published that paper, in that published paper, we estimate that around 40,000 orangutans has been killed just in Borneo. 40,000 orangutans. The orangutans may become extinct in the next decade, in this decade, unless we do something. And this is the same for African elephants and for rhinos and from the jaguars in Mexico and so on. So the magnitude of the problem, of the extinction problem, is gigantic, and the extinction problem is more urgent than the climate change, just because it's happening faster and it's happening now. And it is the only environmental problem that is truly irreversible. If climate change, it will let the Earth 2, 3, 4,000 years from now, probably the climate will be again fine, and the same with pollution and so on. But if we lose the animals, the elephants, the rhinos, and so on, life, unless there is a nuclear holocaust, will continue on Earth. But the animals that we're losing and the plants we're losing now will never exist. Same like the trilobites or the dinosaurs that became extinct in the past, because of a mass extinction similar to what's happening now, they will never exist again.
And there's one reason for it, or 8 billion reasons for it. Whenever I see all of these lists, all of these 9 planetary boundaries, I see 8 billion planetary boundaries. I don't see just 9 of them. I mean, as humans, let's face it. There's one word to explain. We can cut biological annihilation down to one word. And do you consider yourself a misanthrope yet?
Sorry. I was going to tell you something that I remember that you asked, how do I cope? Well, on the one hand, this is terrible. But on the other hand, I feel incredibly fortunate to be able to be a scientist who can put this information together. And our papers have been incredibly, they have become viral. And I think this has given us an opportunity to be able to tell the public, to tell our big organizations, corporations, governments, where we are and what we should do. In that sense, I feel fortunate that with our science, that we as scientists can at least warn humanity of what's going on. And that the bad news is the magnitude of the problem is much, much worse than we expected. The good news is that there is still a window of opportunity, probably 10, 15 years to act. And this is why I cope. I try to do my best to try to save as many species of plants and animals as possible. And that's kept me going. And many times I don't think the dire consequences directly, because it's just too much. The burden on us, of the people who are working on this, is gigantic. But on the other hand, we're very few lucky ones who have the opportunity to work on this. And now that you mentioned exactly the causes of the problem, basically we're human growth, human population growth. We're 8 billion people. There are more people now. In the last 3 decades, the population, human population, has grown more than the last 3 million years when our first ancestors appeared somewhere in Africa. So we're just too many, and we consume too much, and we use very faulty technologies, and all of this is causing a massive destruction of habitats, overkilling, over harvesting species, illegal trade, diseases, new diseases, invasive species, pollution, toxification. I wrote 3 days ago something, or 2 days ago something, in relation to the biodiversity day on Earth, and I said, if we were an extraterrestrial coming to Earth, I think we will be very perplexed to see how we're destroying the very basic conditions that allow us to live in this planet. I mean, it will be, if we were a foreign, an extraterrestrial coming here, or we were some humans or whatever form of life 15 million years from now, saying, what's wrong with these guys? How they erode, how they destroy what they gave them. Such a great planet, such a great, beautiful planet with so many beautiful and amazing animals and plants. Why did they destroy them? Why did they kill them all? Why did nobody did anything? Why any of these big corporations were so blind not to understand by undermining these foundations of everything? They were undermining their own survival. It's very perplexing. It's very, 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 very perplexing.
So where does your ray of hope come from? I mean, everything you said, we've been talking for 26 minutes, and I haven't seen anything to refute the last sentence that you wrote 4 years ago. All signs point to ever more powerful assaults on biodiversity. Tell me one sign. Give me one sign, Gerardo, one sign pointing the other way.
Well, there are not global signs in the right direction. Unfortunately, there are none. I mean, the population, human population is still growing. There is, the economies, all the major newspapers, all are still saying that the population is not the problem. That is the production of food. But we cannot produce more food without destroying what is left. There are many interesting, important signs, more localized signs, like success stories on different countries. Like, for instance, now that Trump is gone from the U.S., the Biden administration is taking the right steps in the right direction. And there are, for instance, in Mexico, many success stories of recovering some species, some habitats. For instance, I have a small foundation where only 3 people, and with the 3 of us, are protecting almost 400,000 acres of tropical forest. Just imagine what we could do if we put our act together. But no, there is no, unfortunately, there is not a single global sign coordinated in the right direction. We need, first of all, a new understanding of the problem. We need a new institution that deals with the destruction of biodiversity. It's starting to be in the mainstream. Since we published the first paper in 2015, it has become much more popular in the mainstream, talking about extinction. The IPBES, that is this international group organization that deals with biodiversity, published a big report in 2019 heavily referring to our paper, showing that we are heading to a mass extinction. Their headline was that 1 million species were at the risk of extinction. But it's not happening. And people has put a lot of faith that COVID will shake a civilization in such a way that will push it in the right direction. I don't know if this is going to happen or not. But what I can tell you, we know what we have to do. We know what we have to do, and it's very simple. We need to curb population growth, human population growth on the one hand, and we need to make society more inequitable, more equal in terms of human terms, and more sustainable in environmental terms. Sounds really simple, but it's incredibly complicated.
Well,
but as
the
complicated,
population, yeah, let's talk. That's my favorite subject. Didn't China just institute, now it's 3-child policy? You know what's getting all the attention in the mainstream media, Gerardo, a lot more than overpopulation is all of this, excuse my language on this channel, crap about the population declines, and that all of the arguments. Yeah. And everybody is freaking out that as soon as their populations start leveling off, and we finally get to where the only positive sign that I have been seeing is that populations are starting to level off, and it's being met with this absolute barrage of fear mongering that we finally get what we need going. The one sign of light that I see. This is
you're correct. I was going to mention that, but this is not something that we have put our act together to create it. I mean, this is something happening that even the experts on population and demographers doesn't understand exactly why. But the human population, the new models who are very powerful are showing that the population is starting to decline. The human population in most places, except Africa. And this is a great science. Although I have been reading certain authors and even some economists who don't fear it anymore. We remember we have a pyramid like this, and we will have an inverted pyramid. But what this has shown us, the COVID has shown us, is 3 things. One, many people can work far away from their location of their job. I mean, Second, I mean, there is so many people who are supposed to be old, 60, 70, 80, who are doing great, very interesting stuff. So the idea that you have to retire at 60, 65 is no longer an idea that prevails. And that gives a lot of hope, because it does mean that a lot of the population, older population can still be functioning and can still be active economically speaking. And third and finally, we're so afraid that consumption will reduce, or the lack of consumption will reduce our ability to maintain the economy of the world. But it is completely false, in the sense that you can have a much more high quality consumption, instead of massive consumption, quality consumption with less people, that will keep this going. So at least I didn't mention this as part of a human a coherent solution or action, because it's happening more of naturally. But this is one of the great news that we have get recently, for whatever reasons, and there are many.
But very few people would agree with you and me on that statement that this is great news. It's being absolutely treated as horrible news.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter, because this is happening, and this is what I said. This is sometimes how I do survive and how I cope with this. It doesn't really matter what they think. It doesn't really matter if they think it's wrong or whatever. There is nothing they can do. China won't increase their population even if they allow 3 people, because it won't happen. So what we have to do, and the corporation and the governments and everybody that is horrified by this news, the only way out for the way they think is to adapt and to cope with any situation. And that is very important because, no matter what they think, they will have to find out ways how to cope with a shrinking population. And at the end, a fewer number of people on Earth means better standard of living on average to everybody, and will have better conditions on Earth. This is why we said in our paper that we have probably 15, 20 years, because all these facts, all these facts are happening. On the one hand, the human population. On the other hand, a little bit more conscience. For the first time, China has admitted that trade is not good, illegal trade is not good, and is trying to ban the trade of illegal trade of animals. And recently in Hong Kong, there have been put a really important measures to try to curb the illegal trade. And on the other hand, we are starting to feel really heavily the effects of climate change. So even the most stringent deniers are finding out that there is no way now that they can deny climate change. So in other words, all these facts, all these things happening are pushing us to adapt to new realities or collapse. And if you are a big company that has trillions of dollars of assets in oil or other things, it really doesn't matter if you keep on denying climate change, because you won't be able to use those assets if the whole civilization collapses. So if we are cynical in that sense, there is a little hope that all these changes will force us to take a more responsible actions, not because we want it, not because many corporations or government or powerful people want it, but because that's the only way to survive. I'm hoping that that will be the case.
So you have said, what have you said, 10 to 15 years for us to get our act together before what?
15
we
years
don't get our act together.
To really avoid the sixth mass extinction and the biological annihilation, we don't have more than 15 years. I mean, what's happening in the next 15 years to the wild plants and animals of this planet will define what survives in the future. What's happening in the next 10 to 15 years will define the future of biodiversity on the one hand, of the future of humanity on the other. That's the window of time that we have.
And humanity, in your opinion, is going to rise to this challenge?
Well, I think there are some signs showing up. It is a hopeful. It is my hope that will happen, and but unless we face a challenge, and we need, for instance, to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to save the biodiversity, but that's nothing when you compare that the economy of the world is trillions of dollars. Somebody was saying that we need something like $400 million a year to invest on saving the biodiversity of the planet. But that's nothing when you consider that we're talking about trillions of dollars of the world economy. And I used to think, like, if you are sick of something, and let's say you have $1 million, and they say that it would cost you $50,000 to save your life, and you have $1 million, that's nothing. You will save your life. You will invest $50,000. So it's the same kind of analogy. I think the world will understand that we need to put a lot of this money. But on the other hand, we will live much better if we have more land, more forests, and we have better quality of air, and we have more water, and we face drought, and we face all the big challenges of climate change.
Okay. I want to, since we're burning through our hour, how have we already been on there for 38 minutes? I want to switch gears a little bit. There has been a lot of talk about protected areas. We got the 30 by 30 plan that Joe Biden is using to save this country. Is it David Attenborough talking about putting 50% of giving humans 50% of the planet and every one of our fellow Earthlings the other 50%? And now a big piece of this is this term protected areas. Now, I know that you're a fan of mangabay.com, as I am. I know that you've written for Mangabay. Week after week after week, I come on here and report here about these protected areas, that the very notion of protected areas, it seems to me, has become almost a joke. Just every week is the laundry list of the usual suspects, that the very notion of a protected area, it doesn't. Just do a riff on that. On do you agree with all of this setting aside, and what does it mean to set aside a big hunk of wildlands if nobody is there to guard it from the land grabbers and the cattle ranchers and the wildcat miners and the usual gang of suspects? Just take a while and talk about this for a moment.
Yeah, well, what we have to understand that environmental services, all this benefit that we get from the well function of nature, depends on ecosystems, on the species, all kind of species of plant and animals, microorganisms put together in what we call ecosystems. This is a biological system like a tropical forest, mangroves, oak forests, and sequoia forests, and so on. Well, basically, a protected area doesn't mean that we cannot use it. It means that you cannot convert it into pasture or into agriculture. But you can do so many other things in a protected area. So, for instance, in Mexico has an agrarian reform in the 1940s that left the country with no land from federal land. Very few, probably 2% or less of the country is federal land. All the rest of the land, it has owners. So basically, any protected area that you set aside in Mexico, you have to work with the owners to reach an agreement. And the agreement is that they should get some benefits for protecting their land. It's very different from the U.S., very, very different. And those benefits from protecting the land, on the one hand, you get the benefit. On the other hand, you don't turn it into cropland or pasture lands. And those protected areas are very important because if you think as the intensity of land as a continuum from protected areas to that is less intense use to the most intense use that are cities, you will find out that there are many, many different degrees of using the land. And basically what we're saying here in protected areas are places where we privilege the wild plants and animals in the sense of providing us with ecosystem services that we need to maintain the conditions of having life on Earth. So the tropical forests of the Amazon, if they were not important to maintain the climate change of the world, probably will be not important if they were turned into pastures. But right now, when we talk about protected areas, we're talking about a many different array of places, from places like the U.S. national parks that can be used basically only for tourism and research, to places like a biosphere reserve in Mexico and many other places where you can do a lot of activities like forestry, bird watching, tourism, and other things that doesn't change just the forest converted into pasture or agricultural lands. We need those forests, we need those wild places, because those are the ones who can keep the balance of life on Earth. As you said, if the forest has owners, and you empower the owners to protect the land, it is one way to do it. And the other is to have protected areas like national parks, where you have to provide them with the guards and so on. In both ways, both possibilities a right. We need to understand that a protected area is a political decision of using the land in a certain way. On the one hand, you say, "Oh, protected area. We select to leave these areas as protected, meaning more in their natural state compared to areas where we convert it into pasture and grasslands or cities." So it is just a continuum of the intensity of the use, and we have to understand there's a decision, to set aside some places where we can maintain the condition as an insurance for us, for humans. And there are many reasons. We could say you can have ethical, philosophical, cultural, economic, all kind of reasons to protect the areas. If we were very selfish, we need to protect them and protect those species of plants and animals to save ourselves from collapse.
And you don't think the system is broken?
Was that, sorry?
You think the system is working fine? It's got some problems, or it's broken? You don't think it's broken, obviously.
It's not completely broken. It's broken in some places. It's not broken in other places. But we definitely what we needed to invest on that. Let's remember that in the last decade or a little bit more, that destroying forests and killing animals and the illegal trade is as profitable almost as the illegal drug trade, as the human illegal trade and the gun arms trade. It's almost the same as profitable, but the legal consequences are minute. So basically, we're dealing with one of the major illicit activities, but it's not, because it's not understood. It's understood properly. Then the legal the punishment for doing bad things like trading with animals, endangered animals, or destroying forests is very small. So we need to change completely the way we deal with illegal destruction of forests or ecosystems and the illegal trade. The legal system has to equate them to the drug or the arms of the people trade, the illegal trade. Unless we do that, we will lose the battle, because there will be so many interests of destroying those forests and illegitimate interests that provide them these corrupt people with so much money that we won't be able to face the fact and save those areas. I give you an example. In Mexico, we have an area in southern Mexico, the one I'm telling you. We are trying to increase the size of an area of 1.5, a little bit more than 1.5 million acres to 3 million acres of protected land. But to do that, we need to work with the local people and give them incentives to protect the land. Part of the land has owners, part of the land is government land. But there we have drug dealers, we have illegal logging, we have people trafficking with refugees and so on. So it's not a simple problem. It is complicated. And unless we have enough resources, but in terms of people, in terms of the legal framework, in terms of the funds to protect the areas, it will be very difficult. We need to think, we really need to think that we need to invest heavily in conservation, because this is more important than investing almost in anything else at this point on Earth.
Well, I wish us all luck in convincing obviously, people, anyone listening to this interview is going to agree with what needs to be done. I think the problem down here in what I call the doomosphere, I don't know if problem is the right word, but the understanding is that even if we do figure out the ways to do what we need to do, it's never going to fly politically. Number one, and just the cumulative effect of 8 billion people just going about their daily business. is more than this planet is going to be able to handle.
This is probably this is one possibility. The other one is that, like the Biden, the Biden administration is start to put in the right direction. I give in Mexico. In Mexico, the current president doesn't really understand why it's important conservation. But we're pulling within the system, within the government, the right string with the right people, and we are pushing forward very important new initiatives and very important new protected. The laws on protected species and the protected areas and so on. So you have to find out the ways not to think, in my case as a scientist or a biologist, but to put myself on the shoes of a politician or an entrepreneur or a corporation to try to understand what will make them to react in a positive way for what needs to be done. And we have many successes, we have some failures, and we also are. I'm putting together a global initiative. It's called People versus Extinction, where we are going to try to do our best. It's a philanthropic movement that we want to reach in 10 years, working with many other groups, try to protect 100 million acres of tropical forests, 1 million species, and to make a new agreement, a new international agreement on species extinction that will first of all recognize the scope of the problem, and this is an existential threat for humans, for humanity, and second, to reach 4 to 5 billion people, and so they understand what is at stake in terms of extinction, and finally, having this new agreement that what we need to do in terms of investment, in terms of changing things, to be able to gain time while the population stabilizes, and then if we get time 2-3 decades, I think we will be in the long term fine. The big risk is that we don't manage to do it, and then the whole civilization will collapse. I think humans, we have never been in such a dire situation, probably only when we face a nuclear holocaust or something like that. This is probably one of the most difficult threats that humanity has faced ever.
Well, yeah, it's completely unprecedented. Not only is the scope of the problem enormous, it's unprecedented. We are in uncharted territory. I mean, not even, and I'm not even talking about the climate. Usually, when you hear that saying, people are talking about climate change, about being in an uncharted territory. That's just one of the uncharted territories. We've never been in a predicament such as this, and
no.
And speaking,
right.
I just want to get we're going to be wrapping up in just a few minutes here, guys. So I just want to get a few brief comments on. Obviously, we have not talked much about climate change. The way I describe climate change is, I call it if there were 9 horses, if the 9 planetary boundaries were a horse race, I would say right now climate change is probably the dark horse. He's in the back, but with each passing year he's gaining, and at some point, climate change is going to cross that finish line. But by the time it does, will those other 8 horses, the other planetary boundaries, even if climate change wasn't in the race, do you agree with me that people are not paying attention to the other 8 horses?
That's exactly right. We're paying attention to climate change, while species extinction is as bad. The magnitude is as big, but it is faster. I think you're right. This is why we try to reach 5 billion people or more people in the next few years, because it is critical that we know that the species extinction is as bad as climate change, but it's happening faster and quicker and right now. And then just imagine, as you say, the 8 other planetary boundaries. Once climate change hit us at the full range, it will be very, very difficult. But if we have lots of species of plants and animals, we will be able to cope much better with climate change than we have lost most of our forests, most of our tropical forests, our coral reefs, and so on. There are things that are happening also. I mean, for instance, in terms of the science, where we have been, there have been discoveries of tropical forests adapting much faster than we thought. There are coral reefs growing in places that we didn't supposed to grow, adapting to changes and so on. And if you think about that, it shouldn't be so surprising that all these plants, all these animals, all the ecosystem, this ecosystem has been here for millions of years. So they have experienced many conditions, similar conditions of what's happening now. So the difference is the climate change, human climate change is happening really fast, and it's happening with many other factors. This is why when I say that we need to reduce species extinction, population extinction, and it's something that can be done without changing the whole economy of the world immediately, before the population growth, human population growth start to go down at the scale that we need it. There are so many things we can do if we invest it properly, and it will give us time. It will save so many habitats, so many species, that when the other forces, the climate change hit us in full strength, we will be in better shape. But this is something we need to do now. We need to save most of the forest now. And I mean, when people like Attenborough and Neil Wilson, and they say 50 to 50, I don't know if they're right or wrong, but what I say, we need to maintain all the forests, all the coral reef, all the natural habitat that we have now. We will have to do our best effort to keep them as the way they are on the one hand, and to restore as many more as we can in the next few years. Okay, most of the cases, when done properly, it produces economic stability, it produces social stability, is economically very sound, and is politically very sound. So basically, doing it properly, it is a win-win situation. But we need to do it.
Yes, we do need to do it. Well, Gerardo Ceballos, I really, really appreciate you taking an hour out of your busy schedule on a Sunday night, but we are winding down our hour here. So as I close all of my interviews, I'm going to ask you the question too. If you were speaking to the mainstream media instead of to Sam Mitchell on Collapse Chronicles, and you had 60 seconds to send out the Gerardo Ceballos message to planet Earth in the middle of the year 2021, what would your 60-second soundbite about the state of the planet sound like?
Well, the state of the planet, we are in terms of the environment in a very critical situation that we have never experienced before. We have the extinction, the massive population and species extinction. We call it the biological annihilation because of magnitude and scope. It has the potential to cause the collapse of civilization. What is at stake is the survival of mankind. And I would say that we still have time. That's great news. But the window of opportunity is closing, and we should take advantage of the opportunity that we still have.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. And folks, I think that is about all I have time. I could go right on with this conversation, but the clock is ticking in more ways than one, folks. So we're going to have to wrap it up. So Gerardo, stick around for a moment, but for right now, if you enjoyed what Gerardo had to say, please give this video a thumbs up and come over here and subscribe to Collapse Chronicles. We would love to have you. And Gerardo Ceballos, keep up the good fight, brother. We do appreciate everything you're doing to fight the good fight.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.